All right, I'm the flatratemaster, and let's talk tools to repair while wiring. Primarily, we're going to focus on soldering. So, disclaimer before y'all put it in the comments. If you don't want to solder, use butt connectors, but use good ones. Use the kind that have heat shrink, not the cheap ones from Harbor Freight. They suck. Get the good ones, the marine grade ones. Use a proper crimping tool. But we're going to talk about, well, different kinds of tools to fix wiring. Now, the crimping tool I've got here does a perfect crimp. Actually, I got this wrong. Now, this particular crimping tool is from Matco. There's many brands. It's, it's rebranded, but it gives a proper crimp. And if you can actually get it in there, this is the best way to go. Now, obviously, it's not always the best way for where you're working. Normally when you're repairing wires, it's usually not great access. So you definitely want to get a variety of crimping tools like this one. I want to say these are OTCs, but I've got a straight one and a side one. And obviously they've got strippers on there as well. You want to get a good quality crimper. The cheapy ones that you buy at the dime store, no, they don't do a good job. They spread, they don't put enough tension on them. You want a good quality one. One that, actually has some heft to it, because you don't want the jaws flexing, because they're really cheap ones will flex and they won't properly crimp. Just an FYI. And you don't have to go to, the tool trucks. This one's a Matco, but it's, Klein makes them too. I primarily use these for wire cutters because, I've got the other crimping tools. Some of the other stuff you're going to need. Now, stripping wires is always going to be difficult because of where they are. Now, something like this automated one, it's Irwin branded, it's it's Irwin who makes it. You can buy it at Home Depot. Side style from Snap-on, because you're always trying to get into weird, wacky places. These automated ones, which used to work well and now they kind of suck. But you can get various types of automatic strippers or manual strippers, but you want a variety because you want to be able to get in where you need to get in. And not everything is going to fit where you need it to go. Sometimes this will fit in, sometimes this will fit in, sometimes you got to use something like this, or sometimes you got to use one of these little baby ones because that's the only thing you can get in there. Trust me, and nothing worse than going to strip a wire and you don't quite have it in there and instead you mangle it and you have to go even further into the harness. Always fun. So it's always best to have a lot of options when it comes to wire stripping and crimping. So let's talk if you're actually going to solder. Yes, I know most manufacturers prefer crimps. I solder, do what you want to do, but we're going to talk about soldering too. Now, my preferred soldering iron is this from Milwaukee M12. Still recommend if you want to go butane, the Power Probe one. Had too many troubles with the Snap-on rebranded one, the Portisol one. Had just too many problems with it. In fact, I gave it to Paul because he could use it for parts because mine's old like his and they don't make that exact model anymore, so I gave it to him. So let's talk first off some soldering stuff. This is not going to be for heavier gauge wires. It has a limit. The rated capacity is not going to be, you're not going to do battery cables with this. You're also not going to be doing circuit board work with this. I'll put up a picture here, but if you're doing that kind of stuff, you need much more precise heat. You need desoldering tools, and we're not going to get into that. But this is not for real super precise. This is for soldering two wires together in a car, just like this is. Now you can also use the old style gun. You can get a plug-in soldering iron. There's tons of options, but get the soldering iron for the kind of work you do. This is not going to be a production. You're a car stereo alarm installer and you're soldering 15 million wires, which nice that you are. I appreciate it when somebody actually knows how to install stuff instead of scotch locking it and doing 500 blue butt connectors in the same fat thing, I appreciate you. Because, you know, that's a rarity. For that kind of work, this probably is not going to be the best option. I would go butane simply because of battery life, and if you're using this continuously, it does have a tendency to start melting up here, especially if you let this get loose. Just an FYI, I turn it on and off every time I solder a wire, so I haven't had any problems out of this, but that's just me. You're gonna want some sort of sponge or something like that. In a pinch, you can use a cardboard box to clean your tips, but always clean and tin your tips. Make sure they're clean. Don't look at this one. Let's talk solder for a second. Get 4060 or your preference on, I prefer 4060, actual lead solder. Don't go with that silver stuff. It's junk. It sucks. It takes really a lot of heat to melt it, and it doesn't flow real well. That's why a lot of dashes go bad, because that's what they use in them, and a lot of heat. So get you some of this. It's available on Amazon. I'll try to link some of the stuff in the description. Wire holding tools. Now, this is one I just recently got from Snap-on. It's an adjustable clamp, so you can change how tight it is. You can go into various places. It just cantilevers. You can take the wire in and out. I've also got the old standard Lisle one. I put vacuum caps on it to protect the wire, because if you're soldering heavier gauge automotive wiring, you know, they tend to kind of melt into the insulation a little bit, getting it hot. So, and you don't get teeth marks in it. Just personal, you know. And I think it holds a little better than the teeth. All right, so we've got it crimped or soldered. Let's talk, well, heat shrink. You want waterproof style heat shrink, preferably with a resin that comes out and seals it. It's a little more expensive, but much nicer. My preference is actually the stuff that comes in Ford harness kits. Really good stuff, but you know, various companies sell it. You can buy it on Amazon. I've got various kits, you know, I always use the same smaller sizes, so I run out of that and I just buy a new kit. Now let's talk actually melting it. No, don't use a Bic lighter. We'll save that for other activities. Don't use a torch, other than one of the ones with a deflector on it that you're doing indirect heat, not direct heat. You don't want flame on there, because it will potentially melt it and put a hole in it. And the whole point of putting heat shrink on there is to seal it and make sure you don't have any sharp edges on your solder. You don't have a wire hanging out that's going to snag and put a hole in the thing and have a bare wire hanging out. You want to use a heat gun. Now this Milwaukee one is okay for heat shrink tubing. I would get the cone kit, but it's not as ideal as I would like from Milwaukee. It is a lower powered heat gun simply because it's a heat gun. Adam Savage actually did a video on heat guns today and talked about the DeWalt version, and he said the exact same thing that I said, is that it's between, well, he said it's between a hair dryer and an actual heat gun, and I would agree with that. It's in the middle. So it doesn't work as fast as a heat gun, but it works. So if you want to be portable and not have to drag a cord out, use that. But ideally, and heat guns are really cheap. I mean, they're like 15 bucks on Amazon. I didn't bring mine out because it's in a drawer over there and I didn't feel like it. And it wouldn't sit real well over here and all this other stuff. Get a real heat gun. They're not expensive. You don't need a high dollar one. It's basically a short and a fan. So any cheap heat gun, you can even go to Harbor Freight if you're willing to take the chance and get a heat gun. Use that for your heat shrink. and your heat shrink butt connectors. Now, do a side note on the low solder style shrink connectors where they've got low temperature solder in here, and you take a heat gun and you melt the low temp solder, you get a soldered joint. And I use the quotations because one of the drawbacks of them, and I don't have a lot of experience with them, I don't have a lot of long-term experience with them, and I currently don't have any, I don't use them, is the low temp solder. Years ago on IATN, guy tested them, he cut them apart, he found the solder was very poor, and well, you know, he's a smart guy, so I leave it to him. I don't know if they've gotten any better. Again, I haven't used them. I just solder. Every now and then I'll use a butt connector because it's more convenient, or it's something that I just think will work better as a butt connector. But for the most part, I solder and heat shrink. So hope this was helpful in all the tools you might need for repairing wires on cars. As always, thanks for watching. I am the Flat Rate Master.